So as we've established over the past month or so, it is definitely not a good time to be buying a new Mac. There is the transition to Apple Silicon coming right around the corner. We're also experiencing delays because of supply chain issues due to the pandemic. So for buying a new MacBook, it's definitely a weird and bad time. However, as we're going to discuss in today's video, the used MacBook market is also quite messed up at the moment. So today we're going to break down exactly what that means, what's going on and why is it happening, and what should you do about it. So for today's video, we're going to be focusing on eBay. That's the site that I use primarily, and it's also the site that most people are going to have the most consistent experience on. You can get good deals locally on sites like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, but those tend to vary from location to location. Where I live, most of Craigslist is just people selling 8 to 10-year-old MacBooks for $700, so it's not even really worth looking at. So to get an understanding of what's going on when we're looking at eBay, we need to understand what types of sellers there are that sell MacBooks on the platform. And the way that we're going to break it down today, and forgive me if there is a little bit of oversimplification, I want to make this as understandable as possible. There are three main types of eBay sellers that sell used Macs. The first one, the most simple one, are just people who are selling personal belongings. Most often these are people who are either selling their old computer because they're trying to buy a new one, or people that are selling a computer that they have lying around that they don't really want to use anymore to try and get a little bit of extra cash. The second category are what I like to call the MacBook resellers. These are generally the sellers that I focus on when we talk about the scammy listings. They use clickbait thumbnails and headlines. Usually they'll just buy their computers from other eBay sellers and then just kind of overhype them and try to trick them and angle them towards people who aren't exactly sure what they're looking at and make a decent amount of money off of those. We're not really going to focus on those types of sellers today because their prices are ridiculous anyway, so you shouldn't be looking at those at the best of days, so we're kind of setting those off to the side. And then there's category 3, what I like to call the recyclers. These are people who take in computers on trade and are more interested in moving inventory than they are in squeezing every bit of profit out of every single computer they sell. Oftentimes, these are companies that will buy computers in auctions or buy them on bulk from local universities. Sometimes they'll fix them up and resell them. Sometimes they'll sell them as is, the listings that are missing chargers and hard drives and stuff like that. Oftentimes, these are where the best deals lie because they're selling a lot of computers. They're not necessarily trying to maximize their profit. They're trying to move as much inventory as they can. And oftentimes you can find great projects from them as well because you can find Macs with minor defects but pretty significant discounts. So the three main types of listings: personal sellers, resellers, and recyclers. Obviously there is some gray area in all of that and it's not perfectly well defined, but for the purposes of understanding the eBay Mac economy, those are the three main categories. So we'll start by talking about personal sellers. These are people like you and me who just go online and list a computer that they don't want anymore or are trading in their computer. And as I mentioned earlier, the two main reasons why personal sellers will sell a laptop on eBay is one, because they are trading it in, they want to sell it and then apply that money towards a new primary device. Or the second option is that it's just an older laptop that they've had for a while and they don't really use anymore, so they're just going to sell it for some extra cash, not necessarily to replace it. Now, the reason why it's important to understand the distinction between those two is because the angle and the target is a little bit different. So here's how both of those scenarios could play out under normal circumstances. Let's say, hypothetically, I'm looking to buy the new 16-inch MacBook Pro, and I'm going to replace my existing 2017 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now, this is my primary device. I use it every day, and all of my data is on here. So I don't want to sell this thing before I buy the new computer because then I'm not going to be able to transfer my data, or I'm going to have a gap of time where I don't actually have a laptop. So I'm probably going to buy the 16-inch MacBook first, and then I'm going to put this thing up for sale on eBay. And let's be honest, I'm going to be somewhat motivated to sell this thing quickly to offset the cost of the new computer. Now here's another scenario. Let's say hypothetically I'm buying the 16-inch MacBook Pro and now I have this MacBook to keep as my secondary device. But that means that I no longer need my existing secondary MacBook. Maybe I've had this MacBook for a long time and I just don't really see the use in it now that I have two other perfectly good MacBooks, so I'm gonna put this thing up on eBay for a couple $100, get some easy cash, and move on with my day. Those are two scenarios that I've seen happen all the time. However, they definitely look a little bit different now that we are in the pandemic. Let's go back to scenario one. Let's say I was looking to sell my 2017 MacBook Pro and buy the new 16-inch MacBook, but there's a very real possibility that now financials aren't necessarily looking as stable as they were. Maybe I'm concerned about what the future holds or whether my job is going to continue to be stable, so maybe I'm just going to hold on to this MacBook, wait it out a little bit longer. So maybe that listing that would have been there otherwise is no longer going to be there. Or maybe I'm still motivated to buy the MacBook, but I really need to get as much money from this thing as possible. So even if I need to wait a little longer, I'm going to put this thing right at the top of market value and try to wait as long as I can to get as much money out of it as I can. And the same thing with scenario two. This spare MacBook that I've had kicking around might actually be incredibly valuable to me. This thing might be worth $250, maybe I could even get $300 for it. That could be really, really helpful right now. So I'm willing to wait it out to try and get more money for my MacBook. So you can see how this shift in motivation can lead to people listing their MacBooks at a higher price than before. But you may also be wondering, well, if everyone goes around saying, I need some extra cash, I'm gonna sell my old MacBook, wouldn't the supply outweigh the demand? Well, no. And that's because of the other factor that's going on here, and that's the people that are buying on eBay. Let's say I was selling my 2017 MacBook Pro, but maybe I'm not interested in spending $2,400 on a new Mac anymore. Maybe I'm gonna go buy a used one, try to save some money that way. Maybe if I was looking at one of these Retina MacBooks, all of a sudden now I'm saying, hey, maybe I should just consider spending $300 on a really cheap MacBook instead of spending more money that I could be using for other things. And so what we've seen happen there is there's a little bit of a lopsided demand shift that's emphasizing lower MacBooks, which means people are actually able to get their higher asking prices from these older Macs. A lot of these principles also apply to the larger sellers, like the recyclers that I was talking about earlier. It's really quite simple. People are less likely now to trade in their working devices and buy a new one, which means that recyclers are taking in less inventory. They're also operating at a reduced capacity because employees are working remotely, they're trying to reduce overhead and reduce the number of staff that they have working. So you end up with this combination of, well, we don't have as many MacBooks coming in, and we don't have as many people working here to manage the sale and distribution of those MacBooks. So if we scale back to a smaller inventory and we fix our prices or increase them a little bit because now we don't have as much supply, so we don't have to worry about moving it as quickly, then we can ride it out and wait until this pandemic is over. Now that's partially speculation, but I've spoken to a number of people who actually work for companies that take in used Mac inventory, and they've said that they've been operating at sometimes 70% less than the normal capacity. So there's absolutely evidence to support that that's what's going on here. And realistically, from an economic standpoint, it does make sense. Now, all of this would fall apart if the demand for used MacBooks was also shrinking and in a proportionate way. And I'm sure that there's plenty of evidence to suggest that there are fewer people out there right now buying MacBooks, but more importantly, which MacBooks they're buying has changed. There's a large number of people that would have been buying new that are now buying used, and a lot of people that were buying used that are now looking to buy less expensive used models. And so what we see is the used MacBook market is shifting in price disproportionately on the lower end. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, let's take a look at eBay. Now, we're going to look at the mid-range to demonstrate how pricing is shifting, but not as drastically. So take a look at this search. This one, you can see I've filtered for Core i7 4th generation. That kind of gives us a sweet spot of mid-range, late 2013 to mid-2015 Retina MacBook Pros. So the rule of thumb for these models was the late 2013s with integrated graphics were about $550 or $600. A mid-2015 would be about $650 or $700, and then the higher-end mid-2015s with dedicated graphics, those were in the $800 range. However, as we take a look here, you can see that we've got some of these MacBooks creeping back up into the $900 range. These, you would see these types of listings. $960 was not impossible for a decently well-equipped dual graphics mid-2015. However, you can see 18 of these have been sold. We've got more and more of these listings up in the higher end, and there's fewer and fewer that are down low. Look, $700, you're getting a cracked display. $700 would have been enough to get you a working 2015. What you'll see at this price range is that some of the computers that are at their market value haven't exactly moved, but the number of computers coming in under market value, which are usually motivated by people who are trying to sell their computer quickly, has decreased somewhat dramatically. Look at this, a 2 gigahertz late 2013. This is the integrated graphics model. This is not a $700 laptop. I sold one of these for $550 a couple of months ago with the exact same specs. So that's definitely moved up in price. You can even see we're getting some 13-inch MacBook Pros, up almost $700. Another thing you'll notice as I'm scrolling through these listings, there are less individual sellers. Here's another example. This one for $730 is a mid-2014 with the dual graphics, 16 gigs of RAM, and the 2.5 gigahertz i7. It's got some wear. It's a pretty standard example of one of these MacBooks. And these were pretty easily going for $650 before. So you can see we've definitely got a slight increase in price going on here. And as we can also see, this is from a larger recycler. Take a look at their other listings. These are the hallmarks of recyclers. You can see we've got some Dell Optiplex, a random vector monitor. This is the trademark inventory that you find of recyclers, and you can see that their prices have increased slightly. However, it's a different story once you move to the higher end. So let's set up this search. We're filtering for 8th and 9th generation Core i7 and i9s. When we hit apply and we take a look at some of these results, you'll notice that things look a little bit different. First of all, these are all larger sellers. We're not seeing as many individuals selling recent Macs anymore. And you'll also notice that the prices aren't actually that terrible. So here's a 2019 15-inch with the Core i9, 16 gigs, 512 for $1,900. That's pretty much about the same as what they used to be. Even a 16-inch, people are selling these things brand new, or so they say, at $2,000. So this is definitely a little bit strange. Look at this. We're looking at Core i7 9th generations for $1,500. This is a year-old computer. What is going on? Why are these prices not increasing as much? Well, quite simply, just as the demand for new computers is falling, the demand for more expensive used ones is falling as well. So I'm sure that there's less inventory, there's less people selling these computers, but there's also less people buying them, which means that the prices aren't changing very much. So what we're seeing is, in the higher end, supply is going down, demand is going down. In the mid-range, supply is going down, demand is going down, but not by as much. But things change a little bit once we get to the lower end of the spectrum. So now I've set up a final search with one criteria, under $400. There's always been some really interesting stuff in this price bracket. I've had a lot of my projects by simply searching under 400 and just scrolling down. You'll find Retinas that need a little bit of work or are in some rough condition. Sometimes you'll find just a normal 13-inch working Retina MacBook Pro. There's been a lot of interesting things in the sub $400 MacBook Pro results page, but now things are definitely looking a little different. As we scroll down, you'll notice a lot of these 2012 MacBooks are really hitting that $400 price. Look at this. This one's got a 500 gigabyte hard drive. The only upgrade here is 8 gigs of RAM, and they're selling these things at $400. We've got a late 2013 Retina. That's actually surprising. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on a second. I spy something funky here. Okay, yeah. So that's pretty noticeably damaged. I bought a working late 2013 Retina, albeit with less than 512 gigabytes of storage, for $380 2 years ago. So this used to be achievable, but now you get a giant dent. If we give ourselves a $300 budget, things start to get even crazier. You can see we're looking at, this one is a 2011, here's a 2.3, that's also a 2011 MacBook Pro, 4 gigabytes of RAM, this one's only got 8. These are also pushing $300. That would not have been the case. It was possible a couple of months ago to find mid-2012s for $250, sometimes $200. These 2011s were in the low twos, the $100 range. If you're talking about a $200 MacBook Pro becoming a $300 MacBook Pro, that's a 50% price increase. That's a really, really noticeable increase in price. And it also means that you're gonna end up paying for worse hardware. If you keep your budget of $200, now you're gonna end up with this mid-2009 with a Core 2 Duo. This would have gotten you a mid-2012 MacBook Pro that would be running Catalina with a Core i5, much more powerful computer than a mid-2009. So that's kind of what's going on with the used MacBook market. Now granted, there is a fair amount of speculation as to why those prices are happening, but there's one thing that you can't deny, and that is that particularly in the mid-range and low end of the spectrum, prices are definitely higher than they used to be. Now, what exactly are you to do about this? The way I see it, there are 3 different approaches that you can take depending on which of those 3 categories you're looking at: the high end, the mid-range, or the low end. If you're looking at a high-end MacBook, basically the recent Touch Bar generation, stuff newer than 2016, those for the most part haven't changed too much. They haven't gone down in value, they haven't been depreciating as they have been expected to, but they're not any more expensive for the most part than they used to be. If you're shopping in the mid-range, you're still gonna be able to find a decent computer without overpaying for it. You can still get a mid-2015 for under $1,000, which is what I've been recommending for a while. However, you're less likely to find a really good deal because the people that are pricing under market value to move quickly haven't really been doing so lately. Now, if you're shopping in the budget-oriented category, it can be a little bit tricky. You can still find a 2013 MacBook Air with flash storage around $300. That's what I did a couple of weeks ago, although more of those are gonna have 4 gigabytes of RAM instead of 8. You can also still find unibody MacBook Pros like the 2012s that are pretty popular. You can still find those for about $300 to $400, but regardless, you're probably going to end up paying a little bit more than you'd like to in that price range, quite simply because people who are trading in those computers want to get as much from them as possible, and people who are selling an old computer that they have kicking around are probably more motivated to squeeze every dollar from it than they would have been back before March of this year. Now, I know I really focused on MacBooks for this video and specifically on MacBook Pros when I was doing the eBay searches, but this is broadly true when you look across the spectrum of Macs, MacBook Airs, Mac Minis, iMacs. The only Macs that haven't really been affected too much are the trash can Mac Pros, which were crazy to begin with, and the iMac Pros, which there aren't many of on eBay in the first place. So for most people, what I've said is pretty much going to apply. If you're in the higher end market, don't really worry too much because the prices haven't changed a lot. If you're in the mid-range market, it's gonna be harder to find a great deal, but you'll still be able to find something. And in the low end, if you can wait, it might help you to wait, but you may end up having to just spend a little bit more than you were expecting or get a little bit older of a computer than you were hoping. Man, it really is rough times to be looking at MacBooks. It's definitely been hard for me because I pride myself on being able to find good deals and interesting projects, and there just aren't as many of them out there, so it's been a little bit tricky to come up with video ideas the past couple of months, but we'll get through it. For those of you who are looking for new and exciting content, we've got new iMacs presumably coming soon. The Apple Silicon transition is also right around the corner, so we can hold out for that. I hope you guys found this video helpful. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Feel free to follow me on Twitter or head over to my subreddit if you want to do any price checking, if you want to get a sense of if what you're looking at is a good deal. Subreddit is a great place to do that. As usual, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.